but you won't be able to save it. And then also I have some references down here at the bottom and all these examples that you can look at. So you're able to use those later on. So you're able to refer back to this stuff. So please make a copy so that way you're able to actually run some of this code and try it out yourself. Because the idea is that this is kind of like a short intro. The whole workshop itself, it's not as much as the tutorial, but I'd like to at least provide some kind of a small intro so you guys are able to write some code yourselves. Okay, so if everyone's able to get into that and we're all good, let's start talking about variables. So variables are some of the most common things that we do in programming. Every single language, regardless of what it is all going to have something to do with variables. And variables are really important because they allow us to store data. And we use data throughout multiple parts within the program. And you can think of variables kind of like boxes. So if you have like a book, you put it in a box, you can take it, you can move it, you can do whatever you want with it, and then open it back up and take out that book. That's kind of what we do in programming, where we assign a number to a variable. We can run calculations on it, we can change it, and then we get it back. So another important thing that we need to talk about before we even start talking about variables is data types. And I know that might sound a little scary, but data types are pretty simple. They're pretty much just the different kinds of data that we have within a language. So within Python, these are the main ones. We have a string, and what strings are used for is representing text. So if we had like a name, we had a place, we'd represent it with a string, and that's just quotations and the words inside of it. A integer is a number, but it's a number with no decimals, right? It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a whole number. Whereas a float is kind of the opposite of that. It's a number, but it has a decimal. This is really useful for if you have like division, it'll automatically be turned into a float and stuff like that. The thing about integers as well is that if you have something like 3.3 in some languages, it'll automatically get rounded down to 3. So that's something to definitely watch out for using these different data types. And then we also have a Boolean. Booleans are really cool because, they're not super cool, but they're pretty cool. What these are just is true and false. So this is really helpful if you're running a program where something needs to be turned off and on, or you only want it to do something if this is true. So that's where you're going to use Booleans. You can kind of think of it as 0 and 1, which is what the computers read themselves, but Booleans are only true and false, and you'll see where they get used later on. Here we have some examples. So we have a name, a number of people, a pizza's eaten, so you can eat 1.5 pizzas, but you can't have 1.5 people, right? And then you can talk about a list of cool people. This is a list. So what a list is a compilation of the different data types. You can have different data types in a list in Python, and you'll do a ton of editing with this. We won't really cover lists in this workshop, but it's a good thing to know of and like kind of recognize now, because we'll definitely be talking about it a bunch, or you'll be talking about it a bunch later on. And then this is a print statement, which allows us to show these things at the computer and do an output of them. We have one question in the Q of A. This is an excellent question. Where or how should we get Python? I will actually cover this in about 15 minutes. And I will go over how to get Python and get that downloaded on your computer. But let's continue on with variables. Important thing about variables is that they can be changed and you can use the same variable. So here we have x equals 3. That makes, we're assigning the value of x to 3. If we print x, we get 3 down here. But now we want to change x, right? We want to change it to 5. We change it to 5. When we print it again, we'll get 5. So we can use the same exact variable x with multiple values. Here's another example of changing it from a string, right? We have text here, to a integer, a whole number. Even though we use the same variable, this is pretty unique to Python, how we can do this. So x equals hello, print x, we get hello, we change it again, we get 5. And we're using the print statement here, which I'll cover a little bit later on. One of the other major things that we do in Python and pretty much every other language, everything you do in computer science is math. Math is pretty intertwined with computer science. You definitely don't have to be great at math to be a great computer scientist, especially if you're in something like web development. you definitely don't need to learn a lot of math. But once you start getting into the theoretical aspects, like machine learning and some of the more advanced stuff like that, you'll definitely need to get your math skills down. But for now, don't worry about math too much, but we are going to have to do some basic math in almost all languages. Here we have addition. That's pretty simple. We just have 9, and we have our plus sign, and we have 10. We will get 19 when we print it. Subtraction, also pretty simple. We have our little dash, and then we'll get 11. And we're just where you have the print statements around them just to show the value and have it come out here at the bottom. You don't need a print statement to do math. That's just there for kind of a formality and how it shows up. However, multiplication, also pretty simple. But if we look at something like division, this is where it gets a little more complex. So the first thing I'd like you to notice is that when we divide two numbers, like 20 divided by 4, even though you get a whole number from that, it'll still end up being a float or a number with a decimal. So it'll just be 5.0. And this is pretty unique to division. So it's definitely something to look out for when you're doing your coding. Another thing I'd like to introduce is like a division, but it's not ending up in a whole number. You'll get your float still, but it'll be 5.25. That kind of makes sense. Those are all pretty simple examples of division. We also have exponents, which is a number to another number, like a power. These are pretty simple. You just have 2 of these multiplication symbols, and that's you can exponent. You can also do a square root like this. It'll be 9 to the power of a half. For those that are in some higher math classes, you'll probably recognize that. And then we also have modulus. So modulus is pretty much the same as division, but what it returns is the remainder. So modulus is pretty unique, and you definitely probably haven't seen it in any of your math classes so far, but it's pretty essential when we get into actual computer science. So here we have 10. We can think of it as divided by 3, but what it's going to do is it's going to find the remainder. So as we can see in our division before, right, we found just the decimal number, we found what it actually is. But here it's going to do the whole number, and then it's going to find the remainder. So here we have 10 divided by 3, we're going to get 1. If we have 27 divided by 5, we're going to get 2. So modulus might not look like it's going to be used a lot, but if you're doing something like trying to find an even or odd number, it definitely comes up a lot, because you can take any number, you can do modulus 2, and then if that is equal to 0, then you know that it's a even number. You can also do it if you're trying to find something like every 5 things in a list, then you can use modulus. The last thing I'd like to talk about when we look at math in Python is PEMDAS, GEMDAS, whatever people call it these days, is that Python follows this automatically. So for example, we have 5 plus 5 times 4. It's going to do the 5 times 4 first, and then add 5 to get 25. Hopefully that clears up all the things in math. You'll definitely be using this a lot in your programming careers, and it'll definitely come up all the time. Please let me know if you have any questions about any of this before we move forward to some of the functions that Python has. So I'll just see if there's any questions. You can put them in the Q&A, or you can just put them in chat. And then if there's any questions from Twitch, I don't have the Twitch pulled up, but if you're in the Twitch right now, I think one of my assistants will be able to relay that either to the chat or just speak up and tell me. But that would be really cool if you guys that are in Twitch. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'll be happy to take them from there as well. Okay, let's move forward then, since it looks like we're all good. The first thing I'd like to talk about is functions, and these are some of the most essential things to Python. What functions are is they're kind of things that you would do a bunch of the times. So what people have done is they have already set them up so you can easily use them quickly, and they allow you to do a lot of things with your code that would normally be really hard. Like if you're just trying to make a print statement by yourself, it would be pretty tough. But all of these are built into Python, or they're included. You're going to end up making your own functions a lot, but these are ones that built-in functions, the ones that you don't need to make. They're already written in the Python that you download, and they're used many times, which is why they're built in. So you've already seen print a little bit up there before, but what print basically does is it takes regular text and it'll display that on the console or your IDE or whatever you're using. So all it does is it's going to print out the statement, and you're going to be good to go there. This is pretty simple. If we look at something like a print and we have nothing in it, then it's just going to print out a blank line. But if not, it's just going to print out any text. You can also print out numbers, and you can also use variables in these. So I'll add some examples right here. If we want to print out 5, it'll print out 5. If we set x equal to 5, and then we print x, what's going to happen? We're going to get 5 twice, because it's going to print it once up here, and then it's going to print that variable, which is equal to 5. Although it might seem like it would just print x, you can see that it's not in quotation marks. And quotation marks are used when you're just printing out regular text. If you're not, you're going to just leave it like that as your variable. And that's something that you'll do a bunch. You're going to use print statements all the time. I guarantee it. Cross my heart, hope to die. Is you're going to use a bunch of print statements when you want to test your code, when you want to see what it's doing, because if not, it's kind of hard to just look at your code and figure out what the result is before you really print it out. Another thing that I'd like to go over is user input. So user input is really awesome for getting a lot of these beginner projects, because you can make a lot of cool projects only using functions, math, some Boolean logic, and user input. Like dice rollers, you can make some choose your own adventure games. You can do a bunch of stuff with all of these. If we look at user input, it's pretty easy to do in Python. All we're going to use is we're going to use another cool function called input. Input is another built-in function. What it includes is the variable, as we already talked about. This is basically what we're saving the result of this function as. Then we have input, which is kind of like the function declaration. It's saying what we're going to do. And then what we have in quotation marks is the prompt for the input. So it tells the user what to put in, because if we just have the input and no text, they're not going to know what to do with it. So as we can see, we have inputs for multiple different things, and then we have print statements at the bottom. Now, if we run this code, clicking this little button, it's going to say, please enter your name. I'm going to say Andrew. Please enter your favorite color. I'm going to say coral, because that is the code day color. Please enter your age, 17. And then it's going to print out those statements below. So this is really good for figuring out your user. If you'd like them to put in a number, put in their name, stuff like that, so you can print all that out. Perfect, easy. We have another example. What we saw here is we use something called string. I'm going to get this wrong, just preemptively. Concatenation, something like that. Basically, what it does is it combines different strings using this plus statement. This is an older version of Python, and it didn't save from the last time I changed it. I don't know why. But what it's going to use is it's going to use these plus statements to combine either variables and text. You can use it to combine multiple things. In this case, we have the variables and we have the text. And this is if you want to include like a prompt. So you're saying what that variable is before you print it out. And that's really helpful for stuff like that, or combining two different strings into one so you can print it out together. We can also do this down here where we turn it into one variable. We have hello plus world, and we combine it into hi. So hi is saving hello world. We also have individual variables, so we can do it again here, hello and world, and then we add those together into HW hello world, and that's using variables. This is something called casting, which we won't really get into now, but that's also something. Basically what casting does is it converts it from one data type to another. So if we have a number, but we want it to show up as a string, then we can use typecasting to do that. And then when we print this, we get their print statements down here. Now, something else that I'd like to talk about is comparisons. Comparisons are really important in your function design and also your initial projects. You're going to use these a bunch, and these have to do with Booleans. So as we know, as we've kind of gone over already, Booleans are really good for true and false, checking if something is true. And all of these little comparisons here are either going to return true or false. All return means is basically what it ends up saying. So if you have a function that adds 5 plus 5, you're going to have it return 10 because that's the result. So return is just kind of the result of anything you do. Here we have is if. This is called the control structure. It just checks if something is true, then it does this. So if this happens, it does this. Else, which means if this doesn't happen, it's just going to do this. Don't worry about those too much yet. But what it's going to say is that if this is true, so this is just a comparison between two numbers. So if we look at these two numbers, they're both the same. This little thing here compares those two numbers. As you can see, 1 equals sign just assigns a variable to something. This is something that I was super confused with when I just started out. But 1 equals sign assigns a variable to something. Like we set n1 equal to 7, we set n2 equal to 7. But what this does is it compares two things. So if n1 is equal to n2, it's going to print the numbers are equal. That kind of makes sense. So down here we get the numbers are equal. If they're not equal, it's going to do this. It's going to print out not equal. This is another comparison that results in true or false. So if 3 is less than or equal to 4, then it will print out true. So since that's true, it prints out true. If 10 is greater than n1 plus 3, so n1 equals 7, so they are equal to each other. It's greater than or equal to, so it prints out true. So let's try changing up these variables and see what happens. This is going to become 5, and this is going to become 9. Now we run this. What's going to happen is they're not going to be equal. So it's going to print out not equal down here. This is still true because there's no variables on. But as we can see, this now becomes false since this side becomes greater. Hopefully that all makes sense. This is definitely pretty complicated, pretty fast, especially if you're not coming from any programming experience. So what I'd like to do, I know this was a pretty short tutorial, and my goal definitely wasn't to teach you all of Python because there's so much there, and I definitely won't be able to teach you as well as a little tutorial online will be able to do it. I'm going to go over tutorials that you can use to teach yourself Python, but I'd like to show you first a little example of a small little project that combines these assets. So this is kind of a interactive fiction project is what we called it. But the idea behind it is it's kind of like a choose your own adventure themed to a bank heist. So this involves functions that we define, but at the core of it, what we're doing is we're taking user input, we're using comparisons, we're printing things out, and we're calling other methods. This is a great project. If you still haven't come up with a project for Code Day and you're looking for something to do as a beginner, I would highly recommend doing something like this. This is a choose your own adventure. Just search up choose your own adventure in Python and you'll come up with a bunch. You can also look at something like a dice roller, which involves setting up a random elements, rolling 2 dice, and then the user could guess it. They could compare. You can do things like that. You could do number guessing. This is really simple. Basically, the user just guess a number, and then you can also do lower and higher. You can do choose your own adventure, which is like here, and also Mad Libs. So if you're not familiar, Mad Libs, like you're filling in the blank. And this is really good for practicing input and stuff like that. So all these projects are going to involve doing inputs. So make sure you look at those. A lot of these projects also, if they seem really easy, they're very easy to expand off of. So for example, you have Mad Libs, something really simple, and then you change it up to where the user creates their own Mad Libs, or they're able to edit the Mad Libs throughout the when they're doing it. You could even combine something like Mad Libs and Choose Your Own Adventure and some of these randomizer elements. There's also a link here to some more Python project with beginners. And these are classes and books that you can continue with. You can just search into Google for Python books. Look on Codecademy. I'll go over these later, but these are some links that you can look at after we're done here. Do we have any questions before we move back to the PowerPoint? I'm going to wrap up how you guys can move forward with your Python skills. Then we're going to have a quick Q&A so we can talk about using Python and any questions that you had here. But please let me know if you have any questions here on any of this material. I would be happy to go over these things with any of you. I was definitely very confused when I got started out with all of these things, so please let me know. Also, again, if there's anyone from Twitch that has a question, put it in the Twitch chat. Do parameters work the same way that they do in Lua? So I'm not very familiar with Lua. I'm sorry. So I don't really know how to answer that question. But basically how parameters work is you put them, I'll do a quick, let's add some code here. We'll add some code. We'll call it parameters practice. Let's say a cute little comment. Basically, if we have a function, so we have our function called add, right? And what it's going to do is it's going to take A and it's going to, actually it's going to return A and B. So we put our parameters up here, A and B. And when we call that function, we're actually going to call it like this. So we have add and then 5 and 4. What's going to happen is when we call it, we're going to get 9. So we passed these parameters in, and then they were added to this function right here. And then they returned, using our little return method, the result. Can you please go over the Booleans again? Yes, this was definitely something that was pretty complicated and we kind of built up. So I'd be happy to go over these again. Let's find out where this is right here. So Booleans are just a similar data type. So variables, again, can store numbers, they can store text, but they can also store whether or not something is true or false. So here's a little example. Is it raining? If it's not raining, this would be false. Is it hot? That would be equal to true. And these are the only two variables you can have. So it's either false or it's equal to true. And what these are used for is in your program. So if we have an example, if is it raining equals, that's our little conditional sign, or equals equals, is false, I'm going to say print you can play outside, because you can't play outside if it's raining. So what's going to happen if we execute this code? It's going to say you can play outside because this is false and it's not raining. If we change this to true, then it's not going to say anything because it's raining outside and you can't play. So this does get kind of complicated, but basically the way you can think about it is these Booleans are only true and false. This little sign here is just a comparison to see if something is true. So equals equals, is it the same, right? So is 5 equal to 5? If yes. Is false equal to false? Then it will do this. Don't worry about these too much, especially if we're just getting into the basics. These down here, like is equals, greater than, stuff like that, is used for comparing numbers and printing out those results. What's this? What this is going to return, any of these conditionals, is either going to return a Boolean, which means true or false. That gets a little more complicated in like programming structure. But basically, this is just going to become true or false based on what the result is. So as we can see, this is true and this is false. So when we compare true and we see if it's equal to false, that's going to be false. So that's not going to execute. I know that's a little complicated, but yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. If you have any more questions about that, stay on afterwards and I'll try to explain that even more. We have another question about equals equals. So equals equals is just represents, is it equal to or is it the same? So is 5 equals 5? If we do this, then it's going to try to assign the value of 5 to 5. It's gonna have an error. But if we do equals equals, we're comparing two things. We're seeing if they're equal. And we can also do that with variables like we do here. So n1 equals equals n2, and that's just a comparison of the two. Try and play around with some of these in the code that you're provided with. You're welcome to edit this on your own copy and see if it works. I know it might be tough if you're like trying to edit yours and watch the presentation. That's definitely one of the flaws. But afterwards, you can try some of that out. Okay, let's move on to going over like your career in Python and how you're going to move forward to become a Python developer. If you have any more questions about this, please stay on afterwards and we'll go over it. And then also feel free to go to the help desk within the Discord, ask any of the staff members, ask any of your fellow competitors. I'm sure they'd be happy to help you. You can DM one of the staff members. You can do one of those. But let's move back to our presentation so we can go over some more of that. And I'm going to show you how we can move forward after you start picking up these skills. So moving forward with Python, what we're going to go over is the best places to learn, how to start working on projects and what you're going to need, and where to move after Python. Like what can Python do in terms of your careers, how Python can be used to further your job and stuff like that. So W3 Schools is definitely one of the best places to get a reference of Python. They have a small little tutorial thing, but it's more used as a reference. They also offer like a class where I think they offer you a certificate, but I wouldn't really recommend that. But W3 Schools is a great place to learn if you're trying to like figure out how to do something. Say you forgot what a conditional statement is. So you could type in Google, what is a equals equals into Python, and W3 Schools will probably return something like that. Being able to look stuff up as you're coding is one of the most important skills. I'm sure you'll hear this a bunch in some of your beginner workshops, but being able to look things up is really important because there's so much knowledge out there on the internet. It makes no sense to not take advantage of it, especially when it's free and it's easy to access. So the problem with W3 Schools, though, it's just not more like a course, it's more like a reference. One of my other learning tools that you can use to learn Python is something called Codecademy. This is what I ended up using to learn Python. The problem with Codecademy is that it costs a lot. So although it has really good lessons and it encourages projects, these are my two favorite things about this program. The big problem is that it does cost a lot. So you're looking at around $240 for a year, this program. The good thing about it, though, is that it teaches you a wide variety of languages, but unless you're looking to spend a bunch of money, which none of us are, then I wouldn't recommend Codecademy. The way I used it is they did a little scholarship program where they gave everyone 3 months free at the beginning of the lockdown. So that's what I used there. And it was kind of like something that I took advantage of. Although it is really expensive, you're just going in it alone. So that's something to consider. You can try their trial and see if you like it though. The reason I like Codecademy so much is that it provides instructions and then it provides an area where you actually do the coding yourself. So a big problem you'll find with tutorials and YouTube videos like that is there's not a big opportunity for you to try it yourself. And that's ultimately the best way to learn with all of these computer science concepts is you really got to try it. You got to do it multiple times and you need to see what you get. So this is a good example of this where they have the instructions, you're working on a little project, you can write the code yourself and then you get the result right here, which makes it really good for that. Oh shoot, we went a little too fast. Another thing is for learning Python is free code camp. The advantage of this is obviously that it's free with a capital F, except it's not, it's lowercase for some reason. So this is very free. The only problem is that it doesn't provide, in comparison to this, a place for you to actually do the coding, as far as I could see when I did a cute little perusing of it. But it does provide really good videos from professional instructors on advanced topics, beginner topics, all the way through. And they have a ton of different languages, and you can go from complete beginner to professional just through going through some of these courses. They have like 300 hours of content just on Python alone. Of doing these videos and then being able to run the exercises. And this is kind of like a quiz to make sure you understand it. The only problem here is that it doesn't provide big projects as far as I can see, but it is very free. So check that out, especially if you're just starting out and want to watch some of those introductory videos. My next big source is Udemy, because Udemy is really good for providing very high-end courses that people put together and they charge a lot of money for. Not a lot of money, but they have some really good courses on there. They're not too interactive. They're kind of similar to this video format, but there are some really good ones. And r/learn Python is a subreddit that will, about like once a month, there'll be someone on there that'll give away some free courses, give out some promo codes you can redeem, because the idea behind that is that these authors that create the courses are trying to get it out to as many people as they can so that other people will buy it and it becomes more popular on the site. So you can get a ton of free courses by looking on r/learn Python or r/learn programming to redeem some of those courses. And that's why I included that there. But Udemy is the program. I think there's like Skillshare or one of those for getting some of those courses that you can use there. Also, it says GitHub offers a lot of freebies for students in high school through university. that is coming up next. I will talk about the GitHub Student Pack soon. But first, I'd like to talk about projects and how important those are in your development career and as you're moving forward. So a big problem that people end up with is that they do all these tutorials, but then they never apply them. So this ends up being a big hurdle for when they try to move on and eventually, because you're going to have to do projects once you start working and want to start making things your own. They know the individual concepts, but they don't know how to wrap them together into one big thing. And especially something that I've experienced is that half the struggle is programming is just getting everything to work, not the program itself, but then your IDE, your software, distributing the software, version control, stuff like that. That's definitely not the ideal scenario, but it's something that you'll end up with a lot, trying to wrestle with those individual things. So projects are really important for learning those skills and applying what you learn. What I'd recommend doing is watching a tutorial on a topic and then trying to implement, instantly trying to implement it in a little Scratch file that you have going or a small project. Tutorial hell is what it's called when you watch a bunch of tutorials, but you're not really able to put them together conclusively in a big project. And that ends up being a major problem later on in your career when you're unable to put those different skills together. So an IDE, integrated development environment, is what you're going to use to make these projects. And what an IDE is it's a collection of software that makes writing code a lot easier. So this is kind of a requirement, although Python does come with its own IDE. These are pretty much required for really getting going with programming and working together on your big projects. The main IDEs offered are Visual Studio Code, PyCharm, Atom by GitHub, and Sublime Text. Almost all of these are free. Visual Studio Code is free. PyCharm is free for their community version, and you can also get the professional version through the GitHub Student Pack. Personally, I use PyCharm. I really like it because it's pretty specific to Python, and you can also do a good amount of web development on it. Atom is presented by GitHub, and I've heard that's a good one. And Sublime Text is really good, especially if you're on like a lower powered computer, because that's just a basic one. You can spend a ton of time like configuring your IDE and picking one out. Don't worry about too much about it, because anyone can write good code regardless of what they're using. But an IDE is really good for making on big projects and working together. A nice thing about using this GitHub Student Pack, which is basically you connect to your GitHub account and you basically declare that you're a student. You might have to send them your student ID or an example of like your grades or something like that to prove that you're a student, or use like your .edu address. But it gives you free access to a bunch of different programming offers from a bunch of different companies. You can get a couple of free domains, which is really big for working on your websites. And the other big thing is access to all this JetBrains software, which makes PyCharm, IntelliJ, which is used for Java and stuff like that. GitHub is a version control system that enables you to back up your projects, collaborate with others, and share projects. You might have heard about it before, but it's basically something that integrates with Git, which is a software that's version control. And version control is essentially a way to manage your massive project. So if you have a giant project for this big company and you have a bunch of different developers working on individual parts, it's really hard to all work together on that same file at the same time. It's not something like Google Docs where everyone can edit it at the same time. They're starting to come out with that, but not yet. So what GitHub allows you to do is to make changes on your computer and then upload them to a central system that everyone can see. And also with GitHub, it's important to learn that if you want to start contributing to open source projects, which gets really big down the line. What open source means is like anyone can use it. So like anyone can access it and edit them themselves, and you can see what the actual code is. Is Glitch similar to GitHub? I'm not familiar with Glitch is, but I'm pretty sure I know there's one called like Bitbucket. Something like that. If I look up, let's see, Glitch. What is Glitch? I think Glitch is pretty similar. Is Glitch like a version control something? Yes, Glitch looks pretty similar to GitHub. You can definitely use that as well. But GitHub's kind of like the main one, kind of like the industry standard in terms of open source and what we use here at Codeday to manage all our projects. So I definitely look into that and getting good at Git. Now we're finally answering your one question, Garcia, getting into downloading Python and actually getting it onto your computer. So the way you do this is by downloading Python for free from python.org. You can download the most recent version 3.9.2 onto your computer for all different operating systems here. And what you're going to do is save this file to your computer, typically in your C drive. I'd recommend, don't worry about the settings that pop up initially too much, like where it says save to path and stuff like that. Typically the default ones are all right, except I kind of would recommend saving it to your path. And then you're either going to start with your IDE, so configuring that and adding Python to your IDE. That can often be the hardest part of the project, which is why I have 4 hours spent configuring random things. That's crossed out because that's what you don't want to do, but that's unfortunately what you might end up doing. So that's going to involve like configuring Python, getting it to work with whatever software you downloaded, like PyCharm or Visual Studio Code, or you can start right away developing with IDLE, which is like the included IDE, but it's not very comprehensive. It doesn't look very pretty, and it doesn't come with a lot of stuff. So that might slow you down once you get into these big projects. Moving forward, what we're going to do with Python in like your career. So once you get down with the basics and they start projects, you can start looking at fields like machine learning and AI using PyTorch and TensorFlow. You can look into back-end web development with stuff like the Django and Flask, which are like libraries that you can use. There's also bots that you can make, like Discord bots and web bots. We have a lot of those in the Codeday server. And then we also have web scraping, where we use Python to like scour the web and find like information and do stuff with that using Selenium and requests. If you don't know what any of these are, that's fine, but the things you can look into as you start moving forward. Now we're going to move on to my favorite section, because it's something that isn't scripted. It's kind of more free form, but this is the question and answers. So if you have any questions, you can either, I'll stop sharing. What we can do is you can put them in the chat here. You can use the Q&A function. You can raise your hand if you want to like talk. If you don't have any questions, you can leave. I'm not going to force you, but if you have any questions or you'd like to hear what people have to say, please let me know. This is a perfect opportunity. And once again, if there's any from Twitch, we can even pull it right up right now. Please let me know. But please fire away. Normally you have a lot of questions. This is kind of a bummer that we have none. There we go. How to type I don't really know. Okay, so is glitch, we already went over that. Would glitch be fine for large projects? I'm not too familiar with glitch. This definitely is one of the ideal questions that I have. I'm sure that glitch is functionable for these larger projects because it looks like a bunch of people use that. Is Anaconda Python? So Anaconda is pretty interesting. What it basically allows you to do is take all the software that you use to develop with Python. What you're going to end up having is you're going to have your version of Python. So Python 3.9 through Python 3.8 and all your modules. So those are software that you add to it, like requests and Selenium, things that you add like there. And you're going to have versions for those as well. And there's going to be a bunch of different versions, and some of them aren't compatible with each other. Some of them are. And you're going to run into a lot of problems with updates, stuff like that. So what Anaconda allows you to do is it allows you to create a virtual environment, which is basically a collection and instance of Python that it's exclusive to that one project. So everything that you do for that one project is going to be centered around all that software that you've downloaded and all of those versions. So I think Anaconda might include Python. I use this thing called virtual environment, not Anaconda. But I think it might include Python, and at least it has your instance of Python, but you definitely have to install Python on your computer first and then use Anaconda. Will you be on Discord tonight and tomorrow for questions? Yes, I'm on Discord pretty much constantly and way too much. So you can definitely ask me questions whenever you want on there. You can go into the help desk channel where anyone can answer a question. We have a lot of helpful members. You can also ping, which is like notify all the staff members, and we will get to you right away. If you want to like DM me a question or like go into a video call, like and co-working, stuff like that, we'll be happy to help you. You can like share your screen and stuff like that. How do you type math formulas in Python? Like put Python performing math similar to calculator. So if we want to get to those advanced math formulas, so we definitely have something where you can use like quote, I don't know how advanced we're talking, but you can use parentheses to like do something first. But you can also get special modules for working with math. So there's I think there's, if we look at math in Python, we'll see what the specific names of these libraries are. So there's a mathematical functions module within Python that allows you to do a lot more things in Python. For example, if you're doing trigonometry or calculus, you can do that in Python specifically to that. And you'll have to end up using those modules to get some of those more advanced things. But pretty much all the ones that I went over now, the more basic ones, are things that you can combine together to do a lot of the basic stuff. But if you're doing specifically math stuff, you're going to have to look into an additional module. I'm a beginner and losing motivation for coding. So this is one of the biggest ones that beginners face, intermediate coders face, professionals face. Anyone's going to face this. My biggest advice here is don't do what I did, because what I did is I used a professional strategy called get a really big project, realize how hard it is to do that project, and then want to stop. So you're going to want to do the complete opposite of that. And instead, you're going to want to work on a bunch of little small projects. So start out with something super similar, super simple, like a dice roller, a password generator, something like that, where you can quickly code it and then you can get a result. Like you have that feedback loop of trying to work on these problems and you get it back and you're done. And it feels really good to have something done. We all know that. We like finish a project and you're like done and you can share it with others. So what I definitely recommend is starting out really small and try to get individual things done, and then also do things that you're passionate about. So say you're really into biking, right? You could write a program that could compute your bike speeds. It could find routes for biking, find like people to bike with, but you want to find individual hobbies. Like say you're really into video games, you can make a website that displays like different video games and compiles like different stats about video games. Or you're really into music, you could do like a music visualizer in Python. I guarantee you that if there's a hobby that you like and other people like, there's a programming project for it that you can make. But I definitely recommend starting out small and then doing something like that. I saw one question. I know it's like it's answered in chat, but I'm not sure if that goes only to them. So if I'd like to answer that to everyone, because that's a very good question, how to stay consistent with programming in school. So it's definitely good if you can sign up for any programming classes in your school, because that kind of forces you to do it. And this is why a lot of people go to college, because then they pay money to program and they really have to do it. But in terms of staying consistent with individual projects, my biggest principle here, and this is something that I'm pretty bad at as well, is you got to do something very small, right? So each day, you're obviously going to be very busy. You're going to have some days where you can't do any programming at all. I've definitely been there. You're up at midnight doing homework. But what you really want to do is you want to do one thing every day. So even that includes like reading an article on Python or doing one more tutorial. Just challenge yourself to be able to do one thing. And what will often happen is it'll end up turning into a lot more. So every day, I definitely recommend setting aside 5 minutes, like during lunch, to just start working on one of your projects. And I know it can be very hard to get started, but once you get started and you kind of get in like the flow state of programming, it gets way more easy. So the hardest thing is obviously starting. And the big idea behind that is starting out really small and just doing one thing to do. Like have a very small project and very small steps for you to increment. Okay, are there any more questions that we have? Please let me know if there are any more questions because hopefully I can answer them. Um, we've definitely had some very good ones so far. And if there's any from Twitch, if one of the staff or someone in Twitch that's kind of in both could put those in chat because I do not have that open and it sounds really weird when I'm in both and I hear the echo. What kind of languages do you recommend for beginners after Python? This is a great question, and definitely ones that I've tried to kind of figure out. So once you start getting familiar with Python and you want to move into something else, Python is really great for developing the individual skills that you learn within computer science. Because once you start learning with computer science, like the skills that you use there, you're going to learn every other thing together, right? So everything in Python, like variables, lists, functions, directly apply to every other language. They both use both. So what's really good there is that you can quickly jump to other languages. One of my favorites for that is Java, because Java is really good for applying the skills that you learn in Python and then also smallly expanding on them. Another big one is JavaScript. That's used a lot for web development. HTML, JavaScript, CSS are really good to work with Python because you can start making web apps there. But I definitely recommend looking into those. And it's important to remember, once you get down Python, it's way easier to move into other languages. So if you're having problems with Python, realize that you not only do you know a good amount of things in Python, but you're also learning a bunch about computer science in general and how to apply that. So it kind of works like learning languages, like actual languages, like Spanish. Once you get Spanish down, it's a lot easier to learn your second language, even though they might get a little bit mixed up. It's way easier to go from one language to the next because you already know the techniques to learn them and you kind of know the general flow of how it works. So definitely that's one of the most important things within programming is to being able to apply skills from one language to the next. So Java, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, some of those web development languages are perfect. Okay, do we have anything else, anything in Twitch? If you guys are all done, also if we have any questions that you come up with that you remember later on, feel free to ask them in Discord. Ask them to me, any of the staff members, and pretty much everybody will know a little bit and they'll be able to point you in the right direction. Definitely in my first code days, it was definitely very important for me to have a help, and I was very reliant on the code day staff. They were very helpful for getting me started. I was in the exact same place that you guys were about a year ago, so it's very easy to get intimidated about all the different languages and how much you need to learn, but it'll start coming together and you'll start moving forward. So if you guys want to leave, you're good to go. I'll kind of stick around if anyone has anything at the end. Thank you all for coming.